Good afternoon, and sorry I'm late. I was in the contact group for the financial mechanism, and as you can imagine, that's a pretty high priority. So, good afternoon. My name is Mark Zimsky. I'm the coordinator of the biodiversity focal area at the GEF, and we're really glad that all of you took out some time to learn about some of our experiences supporting the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. And we have some really interesting case studies of ABS in practice, and that's why we thought it would be a useful event here to have at the pavilion. We all know there are 3 objectives of the convention, and since Nagoya, the GEF, through its trust fund, but also through the Nagoya Protocol Implementation Fund, started by the government of Japan, has been an instrumental supporter for parties to fulfill their obligations under the ABS, under the protocol. And I think the key message from our perspective, because I know you all want to hear about the examples, is since the COP in Japan, the GEF has prioritized support to parties to implement their obligations under both protocols, but in this case, the Nagoya Protocol, that it's always been a central element of our biodiversity strategy because of its importance to the achievement of the goals of the CBD, and that in GEF 8, in our strategy, we have 3 objectives: conservation, sustainable use, and restoration of natural ecosystems. The second objective is to implement the Cartagena and Nagoya Protocol effectively, and we tracked very closely all the discussions leading up to this COP to ensure that that strategy reflects what was going on in the work of the subsidiary bodies leading up to this COP, so that we're responsive to the guidance that's going to be finalized in a few days. And then the third objective is helping countries develop and implement biodiversity finance plans, which is another big part of the GBF. So I don't want to take up any more time. I know we're late. I'll pass it over to Santiago, but from a GEF perspective, when you leave here, besides these great stories of successful projects and case studies, spread to your colleagues and your delegations that the protocol is important to the GEF. There's a clear objective in the strategy, and that it's up to countries to prioritize the use of the allocation they get from the GEF every 4 years to advance its implementation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Got one here. Thank you so much for coming to this side event. And I'm going to give you a very, very brief overview of 10 years of UNDP support to the Nagoya Protocol. For over 10 years, UNDP has been supporting the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in about 50 countries. And this has been done thanks to funding from the GEF Trust Fund and also the Nagoya Protocol Implementation Fund. And all projects have had 3 main objectives. First is the development of national access and benefit sharing frameworks. Second, the capacity building of local stakeholders on access to genetic resources and benefit sharing issues, and also awareness raising of indigenous peoples and local communities on issues related to access to genetic resources and benefit sharing. And last, we have contributed to build trust between users and providers of genetic resources so that benefit sharing agreements are developed and monetary and non-monetary benefits flow back to the local communities and also contribute to biodiversity conservation. And all of our projects have been included in 2 publications. One is ABS's Genetic Resources for Sustainable Development, which basically, as you know, it describes the contribution of ABS to each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have several copies of this publication right there, so please help yourself after the side event and take one. And we have produced also a second publication more recently titled Access to Genetic Resources and Benefit Sharing Theory to Practice under the Nagoya Protocol. That is right here. We launched this publication during the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and the other one was released relatively recently. And these publications include very, very interesting case studies. And we summarized one of those case studies in this video about an ABS project that was implemented in Colombia that I'm going to share with you. And it's actually a good video to set the stage for the other presentations of case studies that we're going to have today from China, Cuba, and Panama. So,
biodiversity, and particularly genetic resources, are a key driver for sustainable development. Users such as research institutions, universities, and private companies from the agricultural, cosmetic, botanical, food and beverage, biotechnology, and pharmaceutical industries have studied plants, animals, and microorganisms for the development of products. Sometimes they use the genetic resources or genetic material. Sometimes they use their derivatives, which include chemical or biochemical compounds and molecules. We find an example of this in Colombia, where a company uses the genopin contained in the hawa fruit to produce a natural blue dye that may be used in the food and beverage, cosmetics, and personal care industries. Users who want to explore these resources for bioprospecting or for commercial or industrial uses need an authorization that is granted through a contract by their owner. In Colombia, the owner of these resources is the state, which is represented by the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development. Hence, the negotiation of the terms through which the access to these resources is granted results in benefits to be distributed to the country. These benefits may be monetary, paid directly to the ministry to be reinvested in the sustainable use of genetic resources, or non-monetary benefits that may include technology transfer, technical and scientific capacity building of local institutions, or support to local communities to strengthen their entrepreneurial capacities to commercialize biodiversity products.
So synthesizing the outcomes of 10 years of support for projects on ABS can be quite difficult, but I would like to share with you at least 3 main outcomes. We have supported national ABS regulations in about 50 countries. This includes the development of biocultural community protocols in 15 countries. We have raised the awareness and training on ABS for over 30,000 stakeholders. And last, over 250 commercial agreements have been signed. And these agreements are already channeling monetary and non-monetary benefits to local communities. Now, if you ask me about the amount of monetary benefits, that these communities have received, this is quite complicated for several reasons. One of them is because many of these benefit sharing agreements are confidential. And the other reason is because sometimes governments don't disclose this information. However, recently the government of Brazil disclosed that under the 2015 national ABS regulation, they have received about $4 million or so that have been channeled to local communities and biodiversity conservation. And I would like to finalize this presentation with some key messages derived from all the experiences, that we have had with the implementation of these kind of projects. As you know, the role of the government usually is to regulate access to genetic resources and benefit sharing. So they have this kind of attitude where they are supposed to control access, and make sure that the agreements that are signed deliver the highest amount of benefits to local communities. But we found that it is important also for government authorities to be more service-oriented and business-minded, so that they, if they assume this attitude and they kind of put themselves in the position of companies that are trying to access the resource, they're likely to get higher monetary and non-monetary benefits. And related to the previous point, governments still have limited knowledge about business models of industries that use genetic resources. So this means that, for example, they're not fully aware that pharmaceutical companies tend to invest a lot of money in research and development for the production of, say, a pharmaceutical product. In contrast, the cosmetic company invests a lower amount of resources. That it also means that, for example, pharmaceutical companies need about 5 to 10 years or so to put a product in the market. In contrast, cosmetics companies take about 1 to 2 years, to put that product in the market. So there are these kind of nuances that policymakers, negotiators of ABS agreements still need to be aware of, so that they can get, the best deal out of these projects and these agreements. We have found that biodiscovery partnerships are usually facilitated in countries that don't have very, very strict access and benefit sharing policies, and that have clear procedures to request access to genetic resources. Sometimes when these procedures are unclear, this is a disincentive for these companies. Or if it takes too long to obtain access and negotiate these benefit sharing agreements, it's also a disincentive. We found also that blockchain technology can be a useful tool to trace the flow of genetic resources and build trust between users and providers of genetic resources, and there are some case studies on this that demonstrate that. And we also found that over the years, biodiversity-rich countries have increased their scientific and technological capacity to use genetic resources, and companies from these countries can be excellent partners. And this is an interesting development that, for example, we didn't have 30 years ago when the Convention on Biological Diversity was negotiated in Brazil. Back then, developing countries such as Colombia, Peru, Ecuador didn't have a very high capacity. They didn't have these small companies, small biotech companies that we can see today. And this is an interesting trend that we have seen during the last 30 years. So these companies can facilitate partnerships with companies from other countries and benefit mutually by this exchange of capacity. And in the end, hopefully they're able to produce a pharmaceutical, a cosmetic, an agricultural product, and get the best benefit sharing agreement for local communities and biodiversity conservation. And related to the previous point, these small companies that are starting in the countries, they still need a little bit of financial aid. They need technical support as well. That's why we believe that an ABS facility is needed, a facility that brings together financial institutions with these biotech companies that are starting, and then they can get the best deal, and the best product out of this kind of partnership or relationship. And this is an experience that was illustrated many, many years ago by an initiative called the International Cooperative Biodiversity Groups. This is an initiative that was financed by NSF and USAID back in the 1990s. And it was very successful building that kind of capacity from local universities, small biotech companies back in the day. So we believe that a renewed initiative around this can be useful to take ABS product, to the ABS initiatives and projects to the next level. And finally, I have to say that supporting countries for these past 10 years with these access and benefit sharing projects has been a lot of fun. We have learned a lot, and I certainly look forward to the supporting countries for the next 10 years with the support of the GEF, hopefully, so that we can get the best monetary amount of monetary and non-monetary benefits to local communities and contribute to biodiversity conservation. Thank you so much. So now, continuing with the agenda, we have the pleasure of having Mr. Yonghong, Deputy Director General of the Foreign Environmental Cooperation Center of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China. He's going to give us a presentation on the protection of genetic resources, co-construction, co-management, and benefit sharing. This is a project that was concluded recently. It received a highly satisfactory rating from the independent evaluation. They managed to produce several benefit sharing agreements that were signed between local communities and the private sector that are very successful. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Santiago. Thank you for inviting me and to share with us China's. Maybe I can stand up, if possible. Much easier for me. Thank you for inviting me, dear colleagues. It's my great honor to be here to share with you about China's achievements in ABS management, especially on the GEF-UNDP project, ABS project. So a kind of briefing. So as you know, China attaches great importance on biodiversity conservation. During the first phase of COP15, our President Xi Jinping gave a video speech and emphasized that China will pay high attention on biodiversity protection and the establishment of the first 5 national parks, as well as the establishment of Kunming Biodiversity Fund. Just in this morning, so our president again gave a video speech and emphasized again, I think, 3 main points. First is mainstreaming biodiversity protection. And second is kind of capacity building, also supporting developing countries. And finally is a kind of international cooperation, multilateral cooperation among all the countries. So I would like to brief you a little bit about the ABS project. As Mr. Santiago mentioned, this project in fact is starting from 2016 and lasts for 6 years, right? Originally it was for 5 years, but because the COVID-19 is prolonged for 1 year, so this project was supported by GEF and implemented by both UNDP and FECO, Ministry of Environment and Ecology and Environment. The project name is National Framework Project for Access to Genetic Resources and related traditional knowledge and benefit sharing. We call ABS product in brief. I just mentioned that the product got highly satisfactory by UNDP and GEF, and all those outputs was released both on UN and UNDP website. So I will brief you a little bit about the main activities and outputs of this product. First, the product carried out a lot of research programs. All those research works, including the international status and development, and also the tendency of the ABS management, and also especially research on the legislation issues of ABS, as well as in-detail analysis of the ABS management difficulties in China, which I think all those reports are still now helping China nationally in formulating all relevant regulations. I believe all those research outputs are really very good and helps a lot. And secondly, I mean the key issues of objective of the product is to formulate, if possible, legislations. So we help local governments of China to issue full ABS-related regulations in 3 pilot provinces, in Hunan, Guangxi Autonomous Region, and Yunnan Province. 2 of them are generally for biodiversity conservation, but have special chapters on ABS. The other 2 is especially on ABS management. And this project also promoted associations, I mean industrial associations, to adopt relevant industry standards on ABS management. We have mainly 2. First is China Seed Association, and the other is China Association of Traditional Chinese Medicine, to promote ABS management, 2 special standards issued by these 2 associations. And the fourth is capacity building, as also mentioned, another key objective. So the product organized a lot of training courses, totally 26, and the participants are including governmental officials, institutional researchers, and local communities and enterprises. Overall, totally about 326 institutions involved in the training program. About 856 people trained, 40% females, gender balance, always, right? The fourth, that effectively protected genetic resources, as mentioned. So we got ABS agreement signed between private companies and communities, especially with farmers. So the related fields including 10 sectors, like cosmetics, healthcare products, food, agriculture, all those sectors. In fact, this kind of agreement got a win-win solution. It's not only promoted ABS amendment, but also it got more incomes for the farmers, and also more benefits for the experts, for the enterprises. So it's kind of win-win solution. So for example, for all those species protected, in Hunan we have a special China local black pigs, and we have tea trees. Also Momodica grows, too difficult for me. And the golden camellia protected, and also one-thousand traditional Thai nationality medicines, all protected in those 3 pilot provinces. And finally, public awareness. So we produced videos animations and organize the special exhibitions as well as publicity campaigns. Also, in the schools, so reach the public awareness. Totally, I think about 50,000 people involved in all those public awareness programs. So that's a brief introduction of the product activities and outputs, just for your reference. I think this project not only help China, but also as a showcase to the other countries, if possible. So finally, I would like to take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks to GEF, to UNDP, for supporting us, not only this project, but also for other issues related to biodiversity conservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lin Yonghong. And now I have the pleasure to invite to the podium Ms. Lourdes Coya from the government of Cuba. Lourdes is an environment policy specialist from the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment of Cuba. And she's going to give us a very interesting presentation about developing the potential of Thalassia testudium. This is a seagrass in the health sector in Cuba in accordance with the Nagoya Protocol and biodiversity conservation. Please join us. If you want to sit here, it's fine. You can see the screen. Yeah, okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, for me, it's a great pleasure to be here representing the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment of Cuba, and of course, the coordination team of this project. And well, this project, you can see all the different stakeholders that are involved, from the scientific or academic sectors to biopharmaceutical industry, also non-governmental and governmental entities, the local communities, local governments. And this initiative is strongly linked to the major strategic platforms in the country. In first place, the National Plan for Economic and Social Development to 2030, and specifically inside this plan on the strategic axis related to the natural resources and environment, and the objective to the conservation and sustainable use of the biodiversity. But it's also related with other strategic axes on this plan for the human potential over the science, the technology, and the innovation. And of course, is crucial for the implementation of the national environmental policies, like the National Environmental Strategy, who identifies the loss of biodiversity as a major environmental problem in Cuba. And of course, the NBSAP, in our case, the National Program for Biological Diversity, that is the strategic platform to confront the biodiversity loss and include goals and targets, not only cover the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity, also other goals of the multilateral agreements related to biodiversity. And of course, it's related to the Sustainable Development Goals and the Aichi biodiversity targets. Well, this project is going to start next year, in 2023, for a period of 4 years. And the implementing partner is an entity, an institution at the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment of Cuba, the Institute of Marine Science. And why this objective for this project? Well, seagrasses are highly valued ecosystems for the goods and services they provide, and cover about 50% of the Cuban shelf. So in this part, the seagrass dominant is Thalassia testudium, and not only for the Caribbean, only the South Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. and is a species resilient to the human natural phenomena, but very susceptible to the anthropogenic impacts. And recent studies suggest that Thalassia testudinum could possess viable antitumoral agents, very interesting for the treatment of colon cancer. And while there is a potential use of this, the derivative of this species on pharmaceutical or medical point of view, there is a lack on the legal and institutional framework, and also in the protocols for the sustainable harvesting and collection of this species that could threaten this genetic resource. That's why we are proposing to develop and implement the provision of the Nagoya Protocol through the biodiversity conservation, specifically seagrass ecosystems, and by supporting the research phase of the Thalassia testudinum to allow the generation of benefits from the use of a genetic resource. Well, the project objectives will be achieved through three main components. The first one, address to the legal framework. Second one, to strengthen the capacities for the research and the development of this new candidate. And the third one, more broader, to the conservation of marine biodiversity and the habitat of this species. And you can see the intervention sites proposed for this project in different zones of Cuba. The site number 1 is a community, Rincón de Guanao, and here the perspective is to involve the local actors in the environmentally sustainable management of seagrasses. And Site 2 and Site 3, north of Santa Lucia and south of Santiago de Cuba, is for monitoring the seagrasses and a study of its properties to develop a pharmaceutical product. Here you can see in the slide the main expected deliverables to be achieved during the project implementation. In few words, what we expect is to complete or to strengthen our legal framework needed to the effective implementation of the provisions of the Nagoya Protocol at the national level. Also, just to develop guidelines, standards, protocols for the sustainable harvesting and collection of this species, to promote the recognition of the benefits of these ecosystems and this genetic resource, and also prepare the groundwork just to obtain this product, this new candidate with potential for the antitumoral therapy, and also to promote the future commercialization of this derivative of this species on the basis of the equitable sharing of its benefits. So that is a very quick overview of this project that I reiterate that's really important for our country in order to complete and to strengthen our legal and institutional framework in order to effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. So thank you so much for the attention.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. As you may have noticed, I mean, this project was approved by the GEF recently. So it's currently under implementation, is starting to deliver some outcomes and outputs, but I think the real outcome is going to come maybe in 2 to 3 years when the scientific research progresses and hopefully we have a cure against cancer. In contrast, our last speaker, he's going to talk to us about realizing the potential of native microbes in the agricultural sector in accordance with the Nagoya Protocol. This is a project that's about to conclude, and it has found very interesting microbes that can actually be used as a crop protection agent for crops such as coffee and maybe other crops as well. And we have the pleasure to have today with us Dr. Luis Carlos Mejia Franco. He's a scientist. He's a plant pathology and molecular biologist from the Institute of Scientific Research and High Technology Services of Panama, INDICASAT. So he's going to try to convey to us complex scientific concepts in English. Please.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much, Santiago, for the introduction. And first, I want to thank the GEF for the invitation and also for the funding of this project that I am going to present today, realizing the potential of native microbes in the agricultural sector. This is a project implemented by the Ministry of the Environment of Panama in collaboration with several institutions, and in the research component is the Institute of Scientific Research and High Technology Services, which is an entity of the government of Panama devoted to research. Very briefly, we have several research centers in this institution, and we do research in biomedical, biodiversity, and biotechnology fields. And the main objective of this project is to support the realization of the potential of the native microbes in the agricultural sector in accordance with the Nagoya Protocol. There are three main components. This is a 3-year project. We are starting the 3rd year. And in the first component, the main idea is to develop a product for the crop protection industry. In particular, we are trying to develop biological control of coffee pathogens. And second and third components are to facilitate access and benefit sharing and biodiversity conservation. In relation to this, we have developed various workshops, training on ABS, academic, and also general public, farmers. And in the third component, we have monitoring and evaluation of the project with a gender focus, always trying to have a balance of the women and male participating of the project. And in the figure that you see is the typical landscape of coffee plantations in Panama. You see coffee plantation very close to a protected area, which in this case is a national park. And one of the things that we are trying to develop is conservation-based biological control, which I will try to explain in a few minutes. Tropical plant-associated microorganisms are a highly diverse source of biotechnological applications. Very oftenly in the scientific literature, you see reports of bioactive compounds, antimicrobial, anti-cancer drugs, isolated from these microorganisms, isolated from plants. In the bottom part of the figure, you can see this biodiversity component, which is, you cannot see it with the naked eye, but what we do is to isolate and culture these microorganisms from plant tissues in order to study them. And they are of different colors, shapes, morphologies, different lineages, and with a vast array of metabolite diversity that they produce. Again, another picture in where you can see some of the coffee plantations in where we work under the shade of native trees. Here you can see some pictures of the activities that we do on ABS. As I mentioned, we do training on ABS to farmers, to academicians, to the general public. We have also raised awareness of the use of biological control as an alternative to the use of conventional pesticides. So this project is in part important because we can end up the project with something that will be an alternative to a conventional pesticide. And the project has also provided a platform for collaboration of scientists from different organizations, University of Panama, UNASHI University, and the Specialty Coffee Association of Panama, and a number of other institutions. Here you can see leaves of coffee plant infected with coffee rust, the most important pathogen of this crop plant. And this is our main target. We are trying to develop biological control of this pathogen, but we also study other pathogens of coffee, such as Mycena citricolor that cause American leaf spot of coffee. And these two pathogens can cause tremendous reduction in crops in coffee plantations. And we work with the two of them. When we have these organisms, these microbes isolated, we do something relatively easy, which is to grow them together with the pathogens. And in this way, we can see if the endophytes, the fungi living inside the plants, are capable of inhibiting the growth of the pathogen. And in the figure, you can see in the center, these are endophytes, and on the left side, you can see areas where the pathogen cannot grow because the endophyte is producing a bioactive compound, an antimicrobial compound, and we are trying to exploit that in this project. What we do after these experiments is that we isolate chemical compounds in order to identify them. And here my colleague Marcelino Gutierrez, which is the other co-principal investigator of the project, he does the chemistry part, and you can follow the lines there, but we isolate microbes from the plants. Then we do the inhibition trials. You can clearly see this is how we discover antifungals in this case. And then we do the analysis of chemical compounds. This is the general procedure for chemistry. We grow the fungi in big amount, and then we do extraction, different types of extraction. We obtain fractions and purified compounds, and at this moment, we have isolated several new compounds that are in process of description and with activity against the pathogens of coffee. We are also implementing a technique called multi-imaging mass spectrometry, which basically allow us to image the chemical compounds that are produced by these microorganisms when they are interacting. So we can see when are the compounds being produced, under which condition, when which compounds are produced. In this image, in the red square, what you are observing there, and I am sorry that I don't enter into the details, but what this is showing is that there are some chemical compounds, bioactive compounds, produced by the enemy of the coffee rust, the pathogen, only when interacting with it. So they encounter and then they produce the metabolites with activity. So we are very excited with these results that we are obtaining. And this is one of the last slides that I am going to show you today. And here is one of the assays that we do in order to find bioactivity against coffee rust. Coffee rust is a biotroph obligate pathogen, only grows on leaves of coffee. And here what we do is that we germinate the spores of the pathogen in the presence of the fractions, the compounds that we have been isolating from the bioactive fungi. And in the bottom part, you can see a figure, and what this is showing is that some of the fractions that we have obtained from the active fungi are capable of inhibiting germination of the pathogen, of the most important pathogen of coffee, in a manner very similar to a commercial fungicide, in this case, mancozeb. So these are the kind of research experiments that we are doing, and again, very excited with it. And in the end, we want to implement conservation-based biological control. In order to achieve this, we need to have a good understanding of the system. And to do that, we are doing surveys of the microorganism, not just in coffee, but in over 30 different plant species that co-occur with coffee in the plantations and in the forest nearby. So what we are learning from this is what species of good fungi occurs in these plants and can be used as natural inoculum of the good fungi for the coffee plantations, so we can tell the farmers what are good trees for these purposes, and hopefully this will help with conservation of the natural resources in the area. And we have identified several new species of fungi, and the bottom part you see bags of fungi with spores ready to be applied in the field. This year we did a field trial in a different crop in cacao. We identified a fungus that worked to control a pathogen of cacao. And next year we will be evaluating 3 formulations to control coffee rust pathogen. In summary, I just want to highlight that, well, we have identified over 30 strains of fungi with potential as a biocontrol of coffee pathogens. We think that the observed anti-pathogen effects by coffee endophytes suggest potential for the use in crop protection. And we have now 3 formulations that will be evaluated in the field next year. And finally, well, this is teamwork. In this figure, you see all the members of researchers at INDICASAT in Panama. Thanks again to the GEF, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you so much, Luis. This is a perfect example of the potential of microbes in the context of an access and benefit sharing project. And we do hope that the trials that INDICASAT is planning to implement next year are really successful. If they are, then the product would be taken to the next stage, to a biotech company, and then hopefully to a benefit sharing agreement where benefits would go back to the coffee farmers, to the government of Panama, and would contribute as well to biodiversity conservation in the coffee landscapes. And these coffee landscapes, they're like organic, they have shade, they attract biodiversity, so it would be a really successful story. So thank you so much, Luis, for this presentation. Now, if anyone has questions, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Maybe a microphone. This one, hello, it's not working. This one.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Mario Diven. I'm the Senior Biodiversity Specialist for IFAD, the Fund for Agricultural Development. Now, this is really very, very interesting. I have three questions. One, what is, both for the public and private, what are the cost and time involved to develop this kind of ABS mechanism? And in the case of this fungicide, have they estimated the cost of production and the needed sale cost? Is it competitive with chemical fungicide, or what are the applications? And whether you need to do that in each very local specificity, I mean local context, or what is the scope of application? So that's one specifically for you. And on the same topic, I was curious to know whether similar kind of process are going on with soil microorganism, to work on the soil health, soil biodiversity, soil fertility. Do we have similar kinds of application? And third, just, I don't know if it's a tip or not, I was discussing with project partners in Nepal that are doing and developing bio-input also with a mix of local crops. And they were saying that to make the adaptation by farmers had taken the tips to choose the plants that are not eaten by goats. And that was the entry point to find the crop mix. So I don't know if it can give you a tip to select some, or whether it's connected. But anyway, congratulations to all. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Luis?
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting questions. The answer to the first question, we haven't done the calculations of how comparable this will be with fungicides. But we think that the environmental benefits of using this is, I think, is great potential, fantastic. But we have to do that, and we are starting conversation with companies and interested in these results, and hopefully soon we will have this information. In terms of the soil, I did not mention, but we are using advanced DNA sequencing technologies to identify the microbiota in the coffee plantations. And we have identified over 10,000 different species of fungi in coffee plantation, and the vast majority of them come from soil. The soil is super diverse. Then roots are second in terms of diversity of fungi, and then the leaves after that. But not working detail on the soil, not yet. Thanks.
Thank you, Luis. Yeah, it's really clear that if this active compound is turned into a product and is used by farmers, it's not going to have all the side effects and negative impacts of traditional pesticides and herbicides that pollute waters and soils and everything. So it's likely to be very successful in that sense. Any other question?
No, I had a question for the honorable delegate from China, but I think he's left us. But yeah, maybe I can just. Oh, he's there. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. So I was going to ask. I just wanted some input on the recent negotiations on the digital sequencing information and how that fed into your sort of ABS project going forward. So, for example, I work for a company that is looking to develop a biodiversity product. So it's not really a pharmaceutical company. It's creating sort of a product from the sequencing of DNA, as our colleague from Panama said. So it's trying to understand. So we're navigating a lot of complexity in ABS in the last couple of years. I've worked in 50 plus countries and developed lots of different types of agreements. They're all very different, one from the other. There's no single way of approaching a country. So what we're hoping to see, at least for digital sequencing information, is a standard approach that sort of can be used across countries. So I wanted to know what China was thinking about that, and also other sort of welcome to answer from other parties.
Thank you for your question. Our partner from government has some very busy schedule. Then they left after presentation, but I can answer your question on behalf of our UNDP China. So I think for the presentation just proposed by Mr. Yonghong, it's very clear. So the project has signed many contracts between the business and the local communities, especially dealing with the genetic resources in China, and also some contracts between the international or foreign companies with the local communities. So it's very successful. That's why the final terminal evaluation is highly satisfactory. So for the future cooperation, especially based on the GBF, so I think there's some potential to explore the approach and the roadmap for the agreement between different stakeholders in the future. So that's my understanding. Maybe can I ask another question? So, yeah, to our GEF colleague. Yeah. So, no, my question is to you. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. So, as you know, China is very big. So for this project, ABS project, so it's very successful and highly satisfactory. And even we spent 6 years to accomplish this project implementation. But Ministry of Ecology and the Environment still have incentive to promote the ABS mechanism in China. because China is so large and from north to east, from north to south, from west to east is totally different scenarios. So whether, because we have GEF supported ABS already, and already finished. So can we have the second phase, or is still supported by GEF or not? So because they asked me during the terminal evaluation and the closure workshop, so I can't answer that. Then I keep this question to you now. Thank you.
I think we can talk about that after the meeting. It's probably more interesting to have a discussion about the ABS case studies. That's kind of like Jeff business. But for those of you who are interested, we support country priorities and their implementation. So the general answer is yes.
Thank you so much. I'm Verona. I'm with the GEF, and I was very interested in the references to benefit sharing, obviously, and there was also the mention about it being benefiting women, local communities, indigenous peoples, and your presentation even showed that there's a gender focus. So maybe just a little elaboration on how actually the benefits go to these groups of people, just in more concrete terms. Thank you.
So I think the only project that's complete is the one from China.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you are able to
but this one
reflect on
can
that.
also address that question. You can, right, in Panama. Yeah.
Yes, what we are doing as part of the workshops and is that we have sit with the farmers who own the land and that provided the consent to access their land and do the surveys of the fungi. So we have provided them with all the information necessary that is available with examples of benefit sharing. And we haven't started this phase of negotiating with them because we still don't know which one of these is going to work. But the idea is that they know that they can receive benefits for this, and this had been done with equally with women and men in these sites. So they have information, and hopefully we will have good negotiation ahead.
Thank you, Luis. Yeah, certainly in the case of Panama, that is a process that will hopefully happen if a product is developed in the future. And when we set up the benefit sharing mechanism, we will make sure that local communities that provided the microbe, especially farmers, female and male farmers, are compensated equally. And we have the power to influence the benefit sharing process in Panama as well. Also, the national legislation provides for equal, access to these benefits from men and women. But that's certainly a very important question that needs to be addressed in all projects like that. Yeah, thanks. Any other question, comment?
I just want to remind you that the gentleman next to me, he had a very interesting question about the standardization of the processes across countries. So if anybody can touch on that.
Related to DSI, right? Or the standardization meaning exactly? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's a tricky question. Yeah, the history of the development of access and benefit sharing policies, goes back to 1993. I don't know if you remember this famous book published by the World Resources Institute called Bioprospecting. Back then, they published in the appendix a model contract that was a little bit complicated, convoluted, but every single country started adopting that framework and using it for national purposes. For example, Decision 391 in the Andean region, or Executive Order 247 in the Philippines, or even the law of biodiversity of Costa Rica. They started adopting that model. We have found that it's really convoluted, that it's difficult sometimes for companies to comply with that. So what we're trying to promote is a simpler system, and that is also accompanied, if you will, by clear access procedures. I think the easier the access, the better. So we're promoting online access systems in every single country, so that is a transparent process. There are not that many requirements. If you're going to access genetic resources for research purposes, then you don't need to go and sign a benefit sharing agreement. If you're going for commercial purposes, then you go through the route of signing the benefit sharing agreement. But we understand that sometimes it's difficult for companies to do this, and our message to every single country is to try to adjust the access procedures so they're standard, across countries. We have managed to do that in Colombia. We're working on it in Panama as well, and we're about to finish the project there. In Uruguay, in Honduras as well, in several countries around the world, we're trying, we're aiming for that goal, so that the procedures are online, they're clear, there's a clear timeline, milestones, deadline. We know that private companies, they are like a Lamborghini. They just go and they want to do the business, and that's it. And in contrast, countries sometimes take longer, and they get involved into the minutiae, if you will. So we're trying to change that as we speak, but we feel you. Yeah. Any other comment, question? Okay, so thank you so much for coming to this side event. I think it was really interesting. Thank you.